Welcome, super secret agent trainees, to WhizGirls Academy. Today we have a master agent, Dr. Christianna Taylor. We're super excited and we're so grateful to have her. Thank you so much for being here. And Christianna is going to share her journey with us. And we're going to start out with our first question, which is tell us about your childhood.
Oh, good afternoon. Let's see here. My childhood. I'm from Chicago, and I am an only child. My whole family's in Chicago, mom, dad, and then they're one of seven and one of eight, respectively. So I have a ton of cousins, and I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I went to a boarding school for math and science in Aurora, Illinois, and then I headed out to Boston afterwards. Um, let's see here. My dad and I used to play hooky from school a lot, so I have a love of museums. My dad and I would go to every museum around Chicago. My favorite was the Science and Industry and the Field Museum. So Science and Industry because my dad loved the trains versus I love the mammoth ride, and the Field Museum because I love the dinosaurs. So I always wanted to be a dinosaur hunter when I was a little girl until I saw Halley's Comet, and then I wanted to be an astronaut because that's what we were learning about. So that kind of stuck with me. But I had a childhood full of very hot Chicago summers, very cold Chicago winters. So making snowmen, drinking lots of hot chocolate, and having lots of snowball fights with friends. And then I went to nerd school. It was basically like Hogwarts for science and math, and loved every minute of it. Got to do a lot of really interesting things. Got to travel. Got to be exposed to a lot of everything from Nobel Prize winners to astronauts to CEOs, and that really solidified my love of science, like as a young child.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. At what point did you learn about STEM? Like, what age were you? Do you remember?
um, So I love my background. I have a PhD in aerospace engineering. So I do satellite design and technology integration. And I wanted to be an astronaut, and I was 3.5 when Halley's Comets came through. So I would say probably 3.5, just because that's when I saw Halley's, and that's like my earliest memory of it. But my dad and we were called Team Taylor. And so every time I had a science project, my dad was like, "All right, Team Taylor, we have to go out and figure it out." So I remember doing the egg drop contest and like winning because I got to the roof of the building, and I still wasn't breaking my egg. But it was always Team Taylor growing up. But I probably fell in love at 3.5 with Halley's Comet. But I can like all the museum trips, all the Team Taylor challenges, all the science and stuff with I had my uncle was a carpenter as well, so they learned to give me a screwdriver and let me take apart anything to get out of his hair. So it was definitely very, very early, but I'd say 3.5 is probably the one I can remember the earliest.
Wow, that's phenomenal that you remember 3.5. And Haley's Comet, of course, that's amazing. Your passions and hobbies as a child, tell us a little bit about that. I know you got into it a little bit, and now having your dream job.
Ooh, passions and hobbies as a child. I was an avid reader, absolute avid reader. I learned about money because I had a bank account and I could take $5 out for a Scholastic Bowl when I was buying books at school, and I always had to like pay my bills at the library. So definitely an avid reader. I'm a dreamer to this day. So definitely reading and kind of getting lost in a book at any given time. Um, I played piano growing up. I played piano. I knew a lot of music theory because I went to music school as well. I rode horses because my dad wanted to ride horses. So I was like, yeah, we should totally ride horses. So I rode horses, and then when I was older, I was able to babysit. So I would like go babysit for the farm that was near me. Um, yes, in Chicago there are farms. There's actually a whole horse thriving community in the Chicagoland area. Um, I did ballet and I did karate growing up. So, but the ones that stuck, I would say, is definitely piano. Piano is the one that I did. Um, I want to say I was 4 when I started piano. So 4 all the way through high school. So about 16 years is the one that I did. Excellent if you're interested in music. Well, music, but more so math, because there's a ton of math that goes into reading music and being able to keep beat and understanding how music theory works. So it's actually excellent if you're really interested in math.
Wow, that's a really good point. And I don't think any of our super secret agents have ever thought of math and music going together, but we're so happy that you pointed that out. So you mentioned something about the bank account. How old were you when you did that?
Oh, I have always had a bank account as long as I can remember. I want to say fourth grade was the first time I had a bank account in my name. So I had a savings account that was at my mom's. My mom basically opened a savings account in my name, and then any type of money I quote unquote made, or holiday money, or grades, or chores, all that went in there. So this is back in the day in the 90s where you actually still had, well, 90s and 80s, where you still had a checking book. So you had to balance your checkbook. So my mom would have me balance her book as well as balance mine as a way to work on the math side. And then I've always just had age appropriate access to bank accounts. So in fourth grade, I had a savings account in my name. When I went away for high school, so I went to a boarding school, I had a checking and a savings account, always connected to my parents' account. When I went to college, my mom put me on her accounts. When I went to grad school, my dad put me on his account. So I've always had access to bank accounts. And then I'd say where I learned about more so banking and investing, that one I'll say I didn't actually do until I'd say grad school, because that's where I learned more like options, stocks, money market, long-term investing. So I did that one in grad school, which is actually pretty late, quite frankly. I do remember playing like the stock market in high school, but long-term understanding investing, like having my own job and actually investing my own money, that was probably grad school, because that's just where we had other opportunities.
Awesome. Thank you for that. All right. So tell us about your journey now from Boston University and Georgia Tech to where you are now. And if you want to show us pictures or anything, we would love to see them.
Sure. Let me share my screen. So me going through my journey, things I love. Space, for one. I love to travel. STEM is definitely where all my education goes to, but it's definitely a passion besides just the educational point. I love museums. Like I said, my dad used to take them to me all the time, and I love food. So first start, I am from Chicago. Left-hand picture is me as Rainbow Bright. My mom and I actually sewed that costume together from scratch. So I brought it up just because I think part of my journey is always kind of seeing the STEM behind it. So understanding, even in sewing, how you take raw materials, which, your fabric, your bobby pins, to actually build something. So my mom and I used to build my Halloween costumes every year together. So that was like more of my arts and craft type of story with her. The bottom picture is actually Haley's Comet. So like I said, I was 3.5 when it came. And that's how I fell in love with space. That's how I fell in love with all things outer world, and actually understanding that astronauts get to go into space. This is before my whole Star Wars, Star Trek, Firefly journey. This is just me learning about space. The top picture is actually Mae Jemison. So she was the first Black astronaut, and she's actually from Chicago. I did not meet her until I was 30, and I have a very awkward story about meeting her if you'd like to hear it later on. But she's who I wanted to be like. So and ironically enough, she did all of her education in biology, and I have to do nothing in biology whatsoever. But she was an astronaut, and that's what I wanted to be like. And she was from Chicago, so I had hope. And then the right picture is just Buckingham Fountain in downtown Chicago. It's just one of my favorite landmarks in Chicago. I moved to Boston for undergrad. So I was actually president of the NSBE chapter, so National Society of Black Engineers, which are the two pictures on the left. The picture in the middle, I was actually on a STEP team. And the picture all the way to the right bottom corner, I was an RA. So I say that to say that I did a lot of service in undergrad. I also did a semester abroad in Germany, and I went to Rome, Italy. So that's about that top left picture is me at the Colosseum. Bottom picture is actually me in Greece. The top two right pictures, that's actually Germany, in Dresden, Germany, where I lived. And what happened is that the limestone type of stone they have actually turns black after, I think it's about 50 years. 50 years they'll turn black. So they actually have to keep making copies of the same statue because it keeps turning black. And you can see on the left hand a brand new copy of a copy of a copy, and then on the right what it actually looks like the last time they copied it, right? So I always thought that was interesting, and I kind of brought it up just because my undergrad was in aerospace engineering. I did aircraft design. I actually designed jet engines, and there's so many places you can find STEM. So literally the rock that you use to actually build something. So can you imagine building something like the Colosseum out of the rocks that they had in Dresden, Germany? The entire thing would be black, and you have a completely different feel when you go to Italy. And if you go to Italy, it's a beautiful, beautiful place. Loved it. Highly recommend. But one of the things that they'll tell you is when you go to each one of the churches is that the stone colors were chosen for a very specific reason. So imagine choosing that reason for that stone color, and 50 years later, the reason's completely gone because the stone is completely changed. So you have to like think about like how weather and how your materials actually change over time. That I always found that fascinating, like as I used to travel.
It sounds fascinating. Now, how long did you live in Germany, and how long were you in Italy for, and how long ago was that?
Oh, okay. So Germany, I studied abroad. It was a 6 month project, 6 month study abroad program. So 4 months, 2 months were actually just learning, quote unquote, just learning German, and then the other 4 months was actually doing the semester and taking my courses. I did Italy for a week and Greece for a week, and so I did this as a sophomore. So this was 2002. Definitely been back to Italy and Germany, well, three of them for that matter, since then. But yeah, that was my second trip to Italy, because I actually did a week trip to Italy after high school, where my choir actually went and sang at different churches all throughout Italy. So it was a ton of fun. I have tons and tons of travel stories. So I don't know how much you want to get into those. But yeah, I love
it. Thanks for sharing that. And I think it's interesting that you're saying you can really find STEM everywhere, no matter where you go, and that seeing STEM in your eyes, like you mentioned music earlier, and now travel and like the stones and everything. This is fascinating. I think this is giving our secret agents a new look on traveling and different countries and looking at stones differently after this conversation.
Absolutely. There's a lot that goes in. I actually used to teach a course on the ancient wonders of the world. So how did they build the pyramids? Like, could you build the pyramids in today? Could you build the pyramids, say, in Australia? And some of the answers are no. Some of the things like, Stonehenge, like where the rocks are coming from, are like 200 miles away, right? Like, would you want to build something? Would you import stones that far away given modern times? Now, modern times, the import's easy, but the modern look says no. So what is actually going to last? So those are things that I used to teach to 8th graders, actually.
And how long ago was that? Teaching? How long ago was that?
I taught that course maybe 8 years ago, I want to say. 8 years ago. I was in San Antonio, Texas. Very interesting experience to truly understand humidity. Another huge STEM areas, like how weather affects the type of housing you have, and the type of housing and how civilization actually progresses. So I have a picture later on when I'm in Machu Picchu in Peru. But one of the things I found amazing in Peru is that there's actually only 12 or 13 domesticated animals in the entire world. Of those animals, only one of them are found in is found in the Americas, and that's the llama. And llamas can only carry 12 pounds. So how did you build Machu Picchu with stones that are almost that almost weigh a ton, using a llama that can only carry 12 pounds? So those are the interesting aspects when I travel, because I'm always looking at the history of what was available to the people at the time. And cheat code, it actually turns out that they used water to actually cut the stones. Like Machu Picchu was actually made in a rock quarry. So it's not like it's not like Stonehenge when they had to bring the rocks from 200 miles away. The rocks are right there. So they actually cut them from a stone and cut them there in the stone quarry. So lots of things that like that, where you can actually start thinking about like what it looks like when you're actually in Italy and Greece. Italy in particular, the Romans had the aqueducts, and so they were actually building, like they were basically bringing their water to them, and so aqueducts are made in a very specific way so that you can always actually go uphill or downhill for water. Downhill is always easy, but going uphill, we have to like provide water to an entire city. It's extremely hard, and yet you have these ancient civilizations that never have problems. Well, I won't say never, but they figured out a way to deal with their water issues. So
very cool. Thank you for sharing that. You're opening our eyes in so many different ways with STEM. We love it.
No problem. From Boston, I went to Atlanta. So I went to Georgia Tech for my PhD, although I did my thesis work at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. So I was going back between Atlanta and Pasadena, California. These are some of the small snippet of some of the adventures I had. So I went to the very last shuttle launch, and that's the very top picture. I did an astronaut simulation in the Utah desert. So I actually was the crew engineer for 2 weeks in the astronaut simulation, which is why I'm in the astronaut suit. And you can see the top right corner is the astronomy observatory, and the bottom right corner is actually the habitat. So I lived in that habitat. It was 2 stories with a crew of 6 people for 2 weeks. Absolutely fascinating experience. I am not a camper, so I want to put that out there. I still want to be an astronaut, but I am not the camping type. So I had to learn that about myself, like while I was there. I had every major system fail on me because it froze in the desert. And so it froze the batteries, it froze the water, the water source. Me and my crew literally went underneath that habitat and had to rewire everything so we could heat up our water so we could have the restrooms working. But I loved it. I absolutely loved it. If you look on the bottom right-hand corner, there's a smaller silver building right next to it. That is actually a biodome where we actually were growing food as well. So every single crew member had different experiments that they were doing during those 2 weeks. I highly recommend if you ever if you're interested in astronaut training, or you are a camper, I highly recommend doing some astronaut simulations. There's a few of them around the world. So I did the one in the Utah desert, Mars Desert Research Stations, MDRS. There's one in the Chilean desert. There's one in Hawaii called High Seas. I know they're actually trying to build one in Kenya right now. So there's definitely different ones all over the world that different space agencies provide. I guess going back to my Georgia Tech days and my JPL days, bottom left-hand corner, that is me next to Perseverance. So that is just a mock-up of it. But I was an intern when they were actually still building Perseverance. And this was my first time really living in California. So they were actually testing parts of Perseverance. And I remember my first earthquake happened. And I was like, oh, they must be testing. So we all like run down because I'm not the only one that's not from California. So we all run down because we're on top of the vibrations building, thinking that they're doing testing. And they're like, no, that's just an earthquake. So I'm starting to freak out because, okay, hello, people, the earth moved. Excuse me, why are you so calm about this? No, it wasn't testing. It was not testing, but nonetheless, tons of fun. The picture above that is Michelle Nichols. So if you are a person that watched Star Trek, Michelle Nichols was the original Lieutenant Uhura in the original series. It was amazing meeting her. She was just like everyone's grandma. It was it was such a powerful experience meeting her. And you know, she's just an actress, but she's the actress that inspires like Mae Jemison to become an astronaut. She's the actress that inspired so much representation when it came to Black women in particular being interested in NASA. So if you've ever heard of this, if you ever saw the movie like Hidden Figures, where they were using women as computers, like she represented so many lost voices and non-seen faces that actually contributed to the space situation. And so it was really powerful for me to meet her. The picture right next to the bottom right, next to the habitat picture, that's me with 2 actual astronauts. And so all three of the other two women and myself were all like, we want to be astronauts one day. So we took this as a future and current astronaut picture so that we could like manifest it. The picture of me in Togo, that's just us being grad students in school. That's a reminder, make sure you always have fun. I think I actually, we had a toga party and I actually had friends come over so I could help them make their togas. And I think I made probably 4 of the togas that you see in there. So that goes back to my mom and I always making our Halloween costumes together. I'm like, I can create anything out of anything. So I made my toga and at least 3 of the other ones there too. So
yeah, it looks like you were the original maker. Like they should have had you be like the maker person because, you know, making and DIY became really huge a couple years ago and like you were doing it way before it was like a thing. So
my mom was, because I think it's about having vision and being able to see things. Like I said, I'm a huge dreamer because I was such a reader as a kid, so it's very easy for me to envision new things and not have to draw them out. I'm like, I'm just going to figure it out. But yeah, that's definitely thanks to my mom. If I move on from here, I moved from Atlanta to LA. I was actually working at Microcosm, which is a small satellite company, but the left-hand picture is me on my 30th birthday, actually helping to escort the shuttle that was going through the streets of LA to its landing spot at the museum. The middle picture is me meeting Buzz Aldrin. I was the AIAA event coordinator for Los Angeles, Las Vegas. And the picture all the way to the right is me meeting Bill Nye, who at the time was the president of the Planetary Society. It was my first time meeting him, and I was like, "Oh my God, I used to watch you as a kid." Like, he's like, "That was a really long time ago." I'm like, "Yes, it was," and I still watched as a kid. He's a really nice guy. I actually met him again when I went to Australia. I was giving a talk. There, and he was there. I'm like, "Yeah, I met you this one time." He's like, "That was a really long time ago." I'm like, "You say that every time I meet you," but I lived in LA for about 2 years. Basically finished my PhD. I did not get hired by NASA, so I was making a way, and that's really when I got into entrepreneurship. And so I was quite frankly learning the entrepreneurship side of things. Up until this point, I was completely like a hardcore engineer, as in, you give me a problem, I'm going to work on the problem. I knew nothing about the business aspect. I knew nothing about the team building aspect, the leadership aspect. You give me a problem, I'm an engineer, I'm going to go solve it. And the world does not work that way. So there's a lot of growth for me in that time frame of just learning, quite frankly, business. And I found that it's really important, and it's not just important, but I am actually very good at translating complex engineering topics to anyone. And that's really helpful when you're trying to reconcile the business with the engineering side of things. And that's something I found when I was in LA. I definitely had a lot of fun. You guys have a lot of really great museums. Oh, I love the museums. I'm a huge, that's thanks to my dad. But that's really where I got into the entrepreneurship side of my life. So
that's awesome.
Moving on, I went abroad. So I said I love to travel, and I mean it. I am at about 33 countries right now. So I actually moved abroad to Moscow, Russia, for 2 years. So that top picture is actually me in Red Square. Then I went to Japan. Well, sorry, back up. When I was in Russia, I actually backpacked Asia. So the monkey picture is actually me in India. And then you can see the picture of me and henna on my hands. That's another picture of me, and that's another picture for me in India. I think I wanted to bring up that when I say that there's STEM everywhere, like I really mean there's STEM everywhere. So I'm African American, and you can see that I have melanin in my skin. So how well does henna show up? You know, henna will absolutely show up on my skin, but there's definitely different formulations of it, and there's definitely different shades of it. And then the longer you let it sit, that's all materials when you think about it. So when you think about like any type of tattoo, like if it's actually a tattoo that's going underneath the skin versus a tattoo that's sitting on top of the skin and actually staining the skin, that's all STEM. It's the same problem. Some engineer or materials person said, well, sorry, I won't say a materials person. I'll say that culture, because henna is absolutely I would be disrespectful. I didn't recognize that henna has a cultural significance to it, and there's a very long history to it. I'm not saying that there wasn't a materials person, but they probably weren't called a materials person back in the day when they started utilizing henna. But today's formulations of it, you can absolutely 100% know that there is a materials person and a materials scientist going through and understanding the formulations, understanding like the toxicity, understanding like how long to let it set. And that goes back to that conversation I was saying about the business versus the engineering side. So people have been utilizing henna for thousands of years, but if you want to make a business out of creating the best henna, or for that matter, making sure that it can actually show up on people's skin like mine, that's an entire engineering problem, how to quote unquote optimize henna. Same thing when Japan's an interesting one because I talked about the water in Italy. A very kind gentleman in the Edo Museum in Japan told me it took them 75 years to find water for Tokyo. And I looked at him crazy. Like, what do you mean 75 years? Because the first rule of city building is that you have to have a valid water source. And the first rule of city sacking is that you poison the water source. So the fact that they didn't have water for 75 years was crazy to me. And they had all of these fires that happened because they didn't have water. So they would tear down half the city trying to stop the fire from spreading. And that was absolutely fascinating to me. I'm like, why would you build your city here? That makes no sense. But if you ever go to Tokyo, it's this huge, bustling, like New York. Well, not even New York. Like I feel like it's even more overwhelming than New York if you're not used to that many people. But that made sense to them, and I'm like, this makes no sense to me. It's everything I've ever heard about when it comes to where you choose to build a city. And again, city planning absolutely a STEM field. Like, how do you make cities safer? How do you make it easy for you to egress away from danger, so you can allow people to come in and come out? So when it comes to city planning, when it comes to public transportation, when it comes to, I was talking about the weather. So if you're near hurricanes, if you're near earthquakes, like understanding that's all engineering problems. The bottom right-hand corner is actually the picture of me at Machu Picchu. But in order to get to Machu Picchu, you actually have to fly to Cusco. Cusco has this building called the Coricancha, and the Coricancha, which is my absolute favorite word. That's such a fabulous word, Coricancha, so fabulous. It was basically the equivalent of the White House for the Inca people, and they built it on round stones. That way, if earthquakes happen, it basically had shock absorbers that it could roll on the stones. And I was like, are you kidding me? That's so smart. What are you like? But imagine you're building your city this, like, how many thousands of years ago, and you found that out. Like, that's so fascinating. And another thing, if you see on my Machu Picchu, you probably seen those steps all over Peru. Those are actually scientific experiments. They actually have like hundreds of strains of potato and corn, because they literally were doing biosplicing back in the day, because they were doing experiments. Every single one of those steps were a different crop type. And I just find that fascinating, because if you think about them building through the centuries in different cultures, they're absolutely doing the same thing. They may not have had they didn't have the internet, obviously. So they may not be able to reference other cultures as to why they did something, but they absolutely were doing experiments. So I absolutely find that fascinating, which is like wherever I travel, I try to travel for history and food, because I'm like, oh, tell me more. Versus the top right-hand corner. That's Lucy. Lucy was an awesome little koala that was very kind. I was very grateful I got to go see her when I was down in Australia. Australia gets a bad rap, but okay, I won't say a bad rap. They kind of deserve it. Like, there's a lot of animals that'll kill you in Australia. let's not play. But I went to a wonderful reserve that actually had a lot of excellent excellent education on the evolution of animals throughout Australia, and I thought it was absolutely fascinating. So I got to hang out with koalas and kangaroos. And then the bottom left-hand corner is actually me in Cuba. Beautiful, beautiful city. Beautiful country. But no matter where in the Caribbean, but Cuba in particular, just how wonderful and warm the water is. And unfortunately, warm water actually really helps when it comes to the hurricanes, unfortunately, which is why, like, when hurricanes come through, I live in the Bay Area. Our water is much colder up here, so hurricanes will actually lose steam when like the further north they go, but they don't when it comes to the Caribbean. So that's why you always have that that funnel of hurricane when it comes to hurricane season. Again, all STEM that happens, and whenever you're traveling, it's like, well, what shaped the decisions they made in order to live here, in order to stay here? Weather is a huge one, and with climate change right now, that's going to be a huge determining factor for where people live and what type of housing, what type of technology we invest in. But those are the type of things that I think about whenever I travel. So
yeah, this is all fascinating, and thank you for sharing. It feels like we've teleported with you on your travels, and it feels amazing. But let's go back to one thing. I don't think our super secret agents know what henna is, so if you can explain that, that
oh
would be
yeah,
awesome.
of course, of course. So the bottom middle picture, with my hands out, you can see that there are designs on the back of my hand. So that is actually it's henna is a paste, and I believe it's a plant that they utilize to um, paint designs, and it's used for different ceremonial markers. So I actually went to a Desi wedding, and so part of it is that there's a day where the bride and her bridal party and some of the guests can actually get henna done. And it's done in different aspects, but my understanding again is that it's actually usually done as a blessing. I was getting it because I was in India. I was like, oh, this is fascinating. It is temporary, so they make it into a paste. They do the what's it called what they do whatever their design is, and then you have to wait for it to dry. And so the longer it dries, the more it transfers pigment to your skin. And then when it dries off, you rub it off, and then over time, maybe like an hour or two, it actually starts getting darker. It starts getting darker, but then in maybe 2 or 3 days after you're washing your hands or just washing your body in general, it will start to fade.
So it's like a temporary tattoo, predominantly with the Indian culture, but also Middle Eastern culture. I know they have like ceremonies for henna. So
Absolutely, absolutely. And I also think it's really important to be respectful of. I understand that I do not know the full history of it. I know that when I was getting it, they were explaining, okay, you're going to wait this long, you're going to rub it off, it's going to get deeper. So in my head, that's all an engineering conversation. Like it's clearly interacting with my skin. It's clearly going to get darker as it interacts with air or with sun. It will clearly come off as I wash it with soaps. Those are all engineering questions that I'm having in my head when this is happening, but also being respectful that this is used ceremonially and has a very long history for that matter of the ceremonies behind it. And I recognize my ignorance in that, but I also want to respect that and make sure I bring up that point.
yeah, so like when you get a real tattoo, that's pretty much permanent and it's kind of painful, but henna is more of a fun ceremonial experience where it's temporary.
Right. So, real tattoos. I actually do not have any tattoos, but they are actually injecting the ink right underneath your skin. So, versus with henna or something like it, it's almost like a paint that's interacting with your skin, and the pigment is getting darker, and it's getting darker as it is goes on. Well, as it dries, as the longer it dries, the deeper the pigment potentially can be. Versus real tattoos are actually putting pigment underneath your skin. Your skin has to dry, and it's drying with the pigment underneath it as well, which is showing through.
And so the henna washes off within like a week, 2 weeks, something like that, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Thank you for clarifying that.
I guess going on. As I said, I live in the Bay Area, so I currently live in Oakland. These are just kind of things around Oakland, but I wanted to kind of bring the STEM aspects of them. So the picture all the way to the left, I went and saw the Batman in concert with the San Francisco Symphony, which I highly recommend if you can ever hear your local symphony play any of your favorite movie themes. Highly recommend going to it because one, it has a completely different feel. Like it feels so magnanimous, like when you're like listening to it. So I just went and saw that, but two, as I was talking about how music and math go hand in hand, so does acoustics. So if you've ever been to any concert venue, they actually build those venues so that you can have the maximum impact, so you can hear the music from any given place, and it's not just microphones. So amphitheaters in particular, they're literally made for concerts, and they can be completely open area, but they were engineered so that you can actually hear sound from any given place. Beautiful thing to go see all over Italy and Greece in particular. But like, I was just bringing up the fact that there's a lot of math that goes behind that, and a lot of engineering that goes into like creating the buildings. The other picture, I went whitewater rafting this summer for the first time. That's actually me in the middle right hand side, and the math behind, not math, but the stem behind that is that the we had a lot of rain this year. So it was one of those times that's really good that we had a lot of rain in California. But it meant the river was actually very, very high, which means the rapids were actually much rougher than they actually would have been. I handled it like a champ, if I do say so myself. But I thought it was very interesting that I would have thought that the higher the water, the less the rapids would be, because I would have thought that the flow would actually, it would be harder to flow and make the rapids that you're expecting, but it's actually the opposite. So one, it's okay if what you think happens. I have a whole PhD, does not, and that's okay. Two, it's a lot of fun. So go out there and experiment and see what else is out there in the world. The bottom left is me and my dad. That's the original Team Taylor. And my dad was actually an Army Ranger, and that's us actually at the USS Hornet, which is an aircraft carrier here in the Bay Area. I took him here to go look around. It was a lot of fun. But I personally love lots of machinery. Oh, I love seeing machinery. Like when I travel, I absolutely travel for history and food, and I try to focus on like pre-colonial history. But if you ever get a chance to see like big machinery, whether that's rigs or dams or ships or tanks, like absolutely go see it, because it's absolutely fascinating to see like this big hunk of steel floating on the water. Absolutely fascinating in my opinion. The picture bottom right, my previous job was actually doing 3D printing. So if you don't know what 3D printing is, if you imagine like taking a hot glue gun and putting one layer down, letting it dry, and then putting another layer down, letting it dry, and then kind of doing that all the way through, that's literally what 3D printing is. You're printing layer by layer by layer, and you're creating a 3D printed object. So we actually created 3D printed lights. The bottom right-hand corner is a picture I took of some of the lights that students actually created. So students actually designed these lights, and we actually manufactured them for them. Upper right-hand corner, that is a bonsai tree. That is my favorite bonsai tree. Yes, I have a favorite bonsai tree. There is a bonsai garden that's very close to where I live, here in Oakland. And I love it because one, it reminds me of going to Japan whenever I'm in the bonsai garden. But two, it's a great place to meditate and just kind of enjoy the stillness of a place. But I guess the STEM aspect of it is, in order to do bonsai, it's a huge science. There's a lot that goes into care for bonsai trees. And on one hand, you are dealing with a living organism that's going to thrive and grow with the care that you give it. And on the other hand, this bonsai tree in particular is done in a very specific style. So there's entire styles dedicated to, there's an entire like study dedicated to doing the style of bonsai you want. Now, a style is an art form, but in making sure that it grows in the way you want and thrives in the way you want, that's all STEM. So I was just bringing that up just because it's one of those small little things that I found fascinating. And again, you can find STEM wherever you live, wherever you go. So just bringing that side up.
I love it. Like I said earlier, you're opening our eyes to STEM in everyday life, and that's what this is all about, learning about new things and seeing it through your eyes, which is like very fascinating. So thank you for sharing.
Sure. My second to last side. So this is recent travels. I was actually just in Arizona. I know, super random, but the left two pictures are actually the Titan Missile Museum. So again, if you ever get a chance to go see big machinery and big hardware, It's actually something you go down into the earth about 2 levels, although it goes down, I believe, about 10 stories into the earth. So it's actually very interesting to see like the old hardware that they actually used to utilize. And the two right pictures are actually what they call Biosphere 2. Biosphere 1 is like our earth and like where we live right now. But Biosphere 2 was another simulation experiment that they were trying to do. There's about 9 different biospheres in there, everything from ocean to desert to fauna, and you go through it, and they're trying to basically create these biosphere and do this type of research. And again, if you're the type that likes to camp, excellent experience. If you're the type that loves plants and living, excellent experience. And I also want to like throw out there too that when I say STEM, I'm an engineer, so I'm more on the mechanical side, mechanical electrical side. But things like psychology and psychiatry and medical development and agriculture, those are just as like important. And so there's a whole field dedicated to the psychology of teams. Like teamwork is an entire field. And in business, it's like or organizational behavior. If you're a psychologist, you're looking at the psyche of the mind. And I bring it up because when I did MDRS, Mars Desert Research Station in Utah, we had a psychologist who was looking at team function and how we interacted with each other. At some point, you're going to get sick of your team. Like, what is those relationships? What are those working relationships? How do you optimize that? Those are all experiments, and those are STEM too. So I know I talk a lot about like machinery and hardware and experiments, but like there's other types of experiments that you're running, even if you're not like electrical mechanical person like myself, especially from the biology side. So, and I bring that on the biosphere is because they had a 2-year team that was working completely isolated there for 2 years. So imagine the team dynamics that happen when it comes to working through computers for 2 years. So again, just bringing that up because I think when we talk about STEM, some people are like, well, I'm not good at math, or I'm not good at science, or I'm not good at this type of science. And there's a place for you. Like if you're good at photography, like being able to do lighting correctly, that's an entire field in and of itself. If you're a graphic designer, if you're a musician, there's an entire STEM that goes behind supporting the things that you do. And it's just as important to understand like the STEM that goes into it because it makes your life easier when it comes to your craft. So just throwing that out there as well. And I guess my final slide, what's next in my journey? So told you I love to travel. I have actually never been to Africa. So I am planning a 6-week trip to Africa. I'm trying to go to Morocco, Egypt, Ethiopia, Kenya, and South Africa. So we're doing basically a big half loop and basically spending about a week in each country. I love, like I said, I said I love foods. I haven't really put it in here, but I think Ethiopia has some of the best vegetables and spice blends. And I love going to like those big souk markets. And I'm really excited to go do that. But there's an entire field behind optimizing cooking. Like it's an entire field. And I think that there's a space where people don't understand that your taste buds, this is a random fact, when you taste, you actually taste through your nose. So you're actually tasting with your tongue systems, with your taste buds, but your olfactory is what's actually translating what your taste buds are having all the way to your brain. So when you're tasting, you're actually tasting through your nose. And again, random fact, but point is that I'm really excited to go to Africa and really, 1, do lots of safaris, 2, eat lots of very different food and have different taste profiles, and 3, just travel and see it because it looks beautiful. My current positions are, I sit on the board of Aurelia, which is a nonprofit that focuses on helping students actually work on the parabolic flight, so the Vomit Comet. So they're actually testing their projects on their projects in microgravity. I am helping G-Space, which is an AI platform that is doing space manufacturing on the ISS. And then I am working with Galactive, where we are doing space satellite towing, so doing satellite servicing. So that's what I'm working on right now, what I'm looking forward to. And yeah, hopefully that gives you a little bit more context about who I am and what I do. But happy to answer more questions.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thank you for sharing. Just tell us a little bit about how you got into Aurelia and all the things. And then this is in addition to your job as well, which you're doing now, which you need to tell us about as well.
Yeah, so Aurelia is let's see here. Aurelia, I found out about Aurelia through my network. And so I am just an advisor on their system. So helping different companies and saying, oh, like this is like what I think it looks like when it comes to their setup. I'm really focused on the educational aspect, but they also have a modular habitat that they're actually working on that would be potentially an ISS replacement one day. It's actually quite fascinating. They actually have their mock-up that they've created actually this past summer. I just got, again, my network said something interesting. I emailed them, and so I interviewed. I was like, hey, why don't I help you out? So I'm just an advisor at this moment. I actually have another friend who has a company that does space flight suits for women. So when flight suits in particular are made, they were all made for men because historically men were allowed to be pilots, men were allowed to be in the military, men were allowed to be astronauts. So when women came in, they were like, well, you can just use the same flight suit. And we know women's bodies and proportions are completely different and we have different needs. So she actually created a flight suit for women. And so I actually work with her to work with Aurelia to actually have their participants like potentially wear her flight suit next year for a launch. So that's something I did. The things I work on right now, so I'm currently the chief product officer for G-Space. And so we are working our platform to develop, we're working on the platform so that you can literally design without gravity. So if you ever heard of AutoCAD, we're basically AutoCAD for no gravity. So you can actually design your products and see what would happen if you manufacture in space, because that's really where my interests lie. Like, how do you manufacture in space? How do you develop products in space that'll be useful here on Earth? How do you develop products in space that's useful in space? So that's really where my interest lies. And so I'm helping create G-Space so that you can literally design without gravity. And then Galactive. Galactive is a different aspect of the servicing model. So literally being able to tow a satellite from one place to another means that we can tow it somewhere and then do what I'm calling basically maintenance. So think of it as like a gas station in space. But the first aspect is you got to get there. So you tow it, and then you're able to then potentially do services and like recycling and reuse cases in space, and that's what I'm helping Galactic do right now.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned your network, so it's easier to get a job through your network and connections than sending your resume and all the things our super secret agents will do maybe eventually one day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's definitely it's interesting. I give a very famous talk at JPL called what did I call it? I said you have to stalk, you have to ask questions and say thank you. And that was specifically to get people to start talking to all the different people at JPL. And NASA makes it very easy for you to actually like connect with anyone within the NASA system. And they have like their resumes, their CVs, the projects. I'm like, this is so cool. Like, you worked on what? So it's like getting people to understand that like you have to network and ask questions and see what's out there. And when they see your enthusiasm, then they think of you when it comes to opportunities. And that's quite frankly what's happened to me. Like, I even was talking to them, like, make sure you network with your fellow interns, because I was an intern at the time, and network with your fellow interns because they're going to be the ones doing interesting things later on. And to this day, like 3 of the people I work with are professors at different universities. So if I ever need collaborators, that's exactly who I'm going to go to them, because they're going to say, they're actually going to answer my email, answer my call. So absolutely, like, network and like keep in touch with your friends. Like, I still have friends from the 7th grade right now that like I'm actually going on a trip with in October. So absolutely network. It's huge, and it's huge for your friendships, but it's great for your career for sure. But it's even better for your friendships, your mental peace of mind, just having people that you understand you and grew up with you.
So true. Thank you. Okay, you mentioned learning about STEM initially in your first kind of foray, which was your dad and then your mom. They were very much mentors, but do you have any other mentors that you had along the way?
Ooh, I have my PhD advisor, of course, Dr. Mavericks, who was at Georgia Tech. My very first boss at Microcosm, to this day, I consider him family. So Dr. Wirtz, he actually wrote the book on aerospace engineering and system engineering, satellite design. So Dr. Wirtz is a huge one for me. And then there's a few smaller ones that are all at Georgia Tech. So like the Georgia Space Grant Office, the director there. I actually still follow up with him and connect with him. I actually still know the previous director as well. They did a lot of work to pour into me. And when I say pour into me, I'm talking, I want to start a business. I've never written a proposal before. Will you read this proposal? Sure. Do you know how much you have to pay someone right now to write a proposal for you? Like I'm talking that, oh, I'm interested in doing this, and like, oh, you know what, there's this great program, why don't I nominate you for this, or oh, you're interested in that, like, I have a friend that I went to school with and I can network your way in. These are the type of things that you know I've gotten from my mentors because they're so successful in their field. And I took the time to say, hey, can I have coffee with you? Hey, I'd like to do this. Tell me how you did it. Can you tell me more? And they'd advocate for me because they remember my enthusiasm. They remember what I'm interested in. And they were like, yeah, of course. Let me make a few calls for you. So definitely have lots of mentors. And I try to do the same. But I think that it's really important to pay it back because a lot of people spend a lot of hours supporting me, so I try to support others in return because I can't give them those hours back, but I can give it to someone else, like, going forward.
Okay, so what did you learn when you were 11 years old that you have kept with you to this day?
When I was 11, what grade was that? I guess that was 6th and 7th grade. Ironically enough, that I had a science teacher. I cannot remember her name right now, but she was very, very short. She was like maybe 5'1", 5'2". I'm 5'8". But I remember she was the one that actually taught us about um, significant digits. And I remember in her science class, and she's like, okay, you can't be more precise than the tools that you actually took the measurements with. And that was the one that stuck with me because I remember years later, I was more precise in the tools I took, and I got an F on something. And I remember like, but the answer's right, yeah, but you can't be more precise than what you chose. So I do remember her words that you can't be more precise with the tools. You cannot give a more precise answer than the tools that you took the tools you used to create the answer. So that's how I remember significant digits.
Wow. Thank you. Okay, so student question. Well, let's comment first. You are a real life superhero and a role model. You kind of touched on this, but I'll ask it again. Have you had someone who inspired you in your STEM journey, and how did their encouragement, help you become even more awesome?
Well, thank you so much for the compliment. That's very kind of you. You know what, I'm going to tell you my Mae Jemison story. Mae Jemison, like I said, first Black female astronaut from Chicago, went to Morgan Park while I went to Kenwood. If you're from Chicago, that matters. If you're not, it doesn't matter. But she spoke in my high school the year before, so I didn't get a chance to see her. I was upset, my heart broken. And then I finally was like 29 or 30 when she was speaking at this conference, and I drove down to this conference. I was completely broke. I was ready to sleep in my car because I was like, I'm going to meet Mae Jemison. So I get there, and I'm being like, oh my God, that's her. Like, I'm trying not to freak out, but I'm totally freaking out internally. And she was so kind. And like, I was just kind of there, just kind of looking like, hi, and she was just so nice. And when I say that, like, she took me out to dinner for no reason. She took me out to she was like, she was helping with the conference, and so she had a movie thing, and then she took me out to dinner afterwards, and I'm just like, oh my god, Peaches is talking to me, oh my god, and like trying to contain my joy, and when I tell you, I'm sure I look like a complete crazy woman to this woman. And so then it's like time to leave the conference. And in my head, I'm holding it together. I'm like trying to tell her, oh my God, you inspired me to become a PhD and do all this stuff. I'm like following this woman into the bathroom so I can let her know how excited I was to meet her. And she's just like, okay, that's great. And I'm like, I know, so thank you so much. And I guess I bring it up because one, I usually don't fangirl out over anyone, but I absolutely fangirled out over Mae Jemison. Two, she took it in stride. I'm very grateful for that. And so I try to remember to take it in stride if I ever feel like I'm making a fool out of myself, because I'd make a fool out of myself every time if I got to meet Mae Jemison. And I think it made me better because one, she's quote unquote just a person, but it meant that I could do as many great things as her, and that inspires me to this day. And I've met her since. I've seen her since the first time I met her, and so I don't have to be so weird about it. But the fact that she was so kind and so giving of her time and so just awesome as a person made me want to be as giving of my time. So
awesome, thank you. And for those that might not know who Mae Jemison is, can you explain who she is really quick?
Sure. Mae Jemison was the first African-American woman to be selected and actually fly to the ISS. Fun fact, I asked her a very stupid question. I asked her if she remembered what it felt like. She looked at me, of course I remember what it felt like to strap on a rocket and go into space. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. How can you not forget what it felt like? But yeah, she was the first African-American woman to be chosen and go into space. When I say Nichelle Nichols, as I talked about earlier, she was saying how Nichelle Nichols actually inspired her, because Nichelle Nichols was the first African-American woman to play a science officer in Star Trek, because diversity was huge. And that was huge, going back to the 60s and 70s. And that's what inspired her. And so that's kind of the story behind that.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Another student question, actually comment first. Looking into the future is exciting. What can you imagine for girls in STEM down the road, and how can we make sure that everyone gets a chance to be part of the STEM adventure?
I'll start with the second part. I think that understanding that there's multiple ways to be a part of STEM. Like I always try to emphasize that, because when we think of STEM, unfortunately we have a representation problem. We represent STEM as one person, like this lone genius that did it by themselves, and they're the only one who could crack the code. When actuality, most STEM happens in teams. It absolutely happens in teams. There are so many people and supporting actors and supporting roles that support like these quote unquote lone geniuses and famous scientists and famous engineers. So understanding that there's always a role for you and that there's a way for you to participate, I think is the first part of all of that. And then where I see it going, I don't know if it'll happen in my lifetime, but I hope that we'll have, it's not just representation, because you don't want people to be there just to represent like, oh yeah, a woman was on this, or oh yeah, this person was on. It's like, no, you actually want meaningful contributions, and you want supportive work environments so that we keep women in STEM. Like we want, because I think that we have this idea that it's just a pipeline issue. If we just get you in there, then like you'll stay, when it's like, no, we need to get you in there, and we need to make sure there's supportive environments. There are clear pathways for you to progress in your career, clear opportunities, clear mentorship, clear connection points. And if we actually make supportive environments for women, I feel like we'll see not just innovation, like go much further. We'll actually see representation not be even an issue, because we'll have equal numbers and equal excitement. And that's what I really see as the future of what STEM will be.